Hey, tonight we're going to take you somewhere you'll be thankful isn't your own bedroom. Imagine waking up in Victorian London, before indoor plumbing, before soap was everywhere, and before anyone thought a daily shower made sense. Sure, the clothes looked fancy and the streets were buzzing, but what was hiding beneath those polished shoes and petticoats? Well, let's just say it wasn't always a pretty picture. So, get comfortable, close your eyes, and take a slow, deep breath. Let yourself melt into your couch, your bed, or wherever you're tuning in. Because as we step back into the foggy streets and crowded rooms of 1850s London, you'll find yourself feeling very grateful for your clean sheets and hot water. Ready? Let's step into a world where clean meant something completely different. Trust me, by the end, you'll never take your shower for granted again. Imagine opening your eyes to a world that instantly assaults every sense you possess. A world so dense with unfamiliar odors and heavy with unfiltered life that the air itself seems to press in on your lungs. This is Victorian London, not the polished museum-perfect scene of drawing rooms and top hats, but the real, living city as it would have greeted you one morning in the heart of the 1850s. Before your mind can register what you see, your nose gets there first. It's a wave of thick, almost tangible air, swirling with so many smells you can't pick them apart. Something earthy and rotting, a hint of coal smoke, and a strange, sweet undertone that makes your throat tighten with unease. Every breath feels like it's pressing against the back of your tongue, leaving a lingering taste that's not easy to forget. You try to shift in your bed, if you're lucky enough to have one, and the sensation of rough, scratchy sheets is immediate. There's no comforting softness, no faint aroma of laundry soap or fabric conditioner, just the unmistakable truth that these linens have seen many nights and many bodies before yours. Maybe you catch yourself thinking, just for a split second, about that hot shower you took yesterday, or the soft cotton that wraps around you at home. But here and now, those luxuries belong to another world. The bedding clings to your skin, not from warmth, but from sheer wear, and you're aware of every thread. As your eyes adjust to the dimness, the details of your new surroundings come into focus. The room, if you can call it that, feels smaller than you imagined, cramped, cluttered, and alive with the quiet sounds of other people breathing, shuffling, shifting in their sleep. Maybe it's family, maybe strangers. In this London, privacy isn't a right, it's a distant dream for anyone not born into wealth. Damp clings to the walls, settling into everything you touch. The corners of the room are dark, but even in the gloom, you spot that mysterious greenish fuzz creeping across plaster and brick, ignored because there's simply no energy left to care about it. Outside, the sounds are never far away. The city never really sleeps, and its symphony filters in through every crack and seam. A distant clatter of hooves on cobblestone, the clang of iron wheels, voices echoing from streets below. Yet even with all this noise, it's the silence of your own body that you notice most. The feel of the mattress beneath you, far firmer and more uneven than anything you'd willingly choose. The chill of the air that never quite goes away. The weight of heavy blankets that offer little comfort against the relentless damp. You become acutely aware of your skin, your breath, the way your body aches for a comfort that simply doesn't exist here. Now, consider for a moment how utterly unremarkable this was to the people who woke up in London every day. For them, this strange blend of smells and sensations was normal, just the background to their lives. The scent of coal drifting in through the window, a reminder that the fires of industry never stop burning. The sharp tang of something acrid and chemical in the air, evidence of 1,000 factories and workshops that feed the city's appetite. It all mixes together into something you might call the flavor of the city, a flavor as much a part of daily life as bread and tea. Moving slowly, you sit up and place your feet on the floor. The chill of the boards seeps through your soles, grounding you further in this new reality. If you're lucky, you might have a rug beneath your feet, though it's likely as rough and worn as everything else. If not, the cold is another silent companion. A look around the room reveals belongings: clothes, shoes, maybe a battered hat or two, each one telling a story of survival, of making do. Nothing is new, nothing is fresh. Everything is patched and mended until it's nearly unrecognizable from when it first left a shop. The walls around you, stained by years of smoke and damp, offer little comfort. Any light filtering in through the grimy window is gray, filtered through layers of soot and London fog, never quite enough to make the world outside seem inviting. You can smell the city even through closed glass, a heavy, persistent aroma that clings to everything. Sometimes it feels as though the city itself is breathing, each exhale heavier than the last. It's in these first moments, before the day even truly begins, that you understand what it means to live in Victorian London. Cleanliness is not a given, not something to be taken for granted. Every aspect of your environment reminds you that comfort is scarce, and that the simplest pleasures, a warm bath, clean clothes, a moment of solitude, are the privileges of another class. Even if you belong to the rare few who have their own space, perhaps a small bedroom in a quieter part of town, you still feel the weight of the city pressing in, its presence inescapable. Yet life moves forward. Despite the persistent discomfort, people get up, they stretch and yawn and try to shake off the night's chills. The sounds of morning grow louder as others stir, a low hum of conversation and footsteps growing with the dawn. Someone coughs, another pulls on a pair of boots still damp from yesterday's rain. In a city of millions, you are never truly alone, never untouched by the world outside your door. But for now, just before you step into the flow of the day, you sit still and notice the sensations you'd never bother to name at home. The roughness of the sheets, the taste of the air, the way every object seems to carry the ghost of 100 yesterdays. And as you inhale, slowly and deliberately, you realize this is not just history. It is a living, breathing world, as real to those who inhabited it as your world is to you. Here, the struggle for comfort, for cleanliness, for even a moment of softness is ongoing, and every sense you have is required just to make it through the morning. If you ever wondered what it would feel like to truly share your life with others, Victorian London would have answered that question the moment you tried to claim even a scrap of personal space. Privacy here is a fantasy, a distant dream whispered about but rarely experienced, especially if you belong to the majority, living day by day in the underbelly of the city. You step out from your narrow bed and instantly become aware of the bodies around you. Siblings, parents, perhaps an aunt or uncle, maybe even a boarder who's nothing more than a shadow at the edge of your vision. It's impossible to separate your own breath from the shared warmth of all those sleeping forms. The air is thick and close, filled with a dozen intermingled scents, some familiar, others strange, none entirely pleasant. Every surface in your world tells a story of endurance. The walls, papered with peeling scraps, have absorbed years of spilled tea, coal dust, and the unnameable traces of too many people squeezed into too little space. In the farthest corners, dampness flourishes, a silent bloom of green and gray that no one has time or means to fight. When you touch the wall, your fingertips come away cool and faintly sticky, as if the building itself is sweating. It's not just your room. The entire house seems to exhale with every movement, a collective sigh that never quite fades. The room you share with so many others is not large. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to fit a small modern kitchen in here. 10, maybe 12 feet by 10, and every inch is spoken for. The only thing more common than the scratchy blankets and battered shoes is the constant, inescapable nearness of other people. The shuffle of someone turning over in sleep, the mumble of a half-woken dream, the quiet negotiation over who gets the good spot near the stove. There is no door you can close, no line you can draw. The concept of mine dissolves under the daily realities of ours. If you step into the corridor, or what passes for one, you're met by the persistent aroma of stale air, cooked cabbage, and the faint edge of something sharper, more pungent. These are the smells that seep through cracks, lingering from last week's dinner or yesterday's rain-soaked boots. In buildings this crowded, boundaries are soft. The people you share your walls with are not just neighbors, they're companions in survival. Sometimes you know their names, sometimes not. Their arguments, their laughter, even the rhythm of their coughs become as familiar as your own heartbeat. It's easy to romanticize the close-knit communities of the past, to imagine everyone as one big family. But in reality, the constant presence of others is both comfort and burden. There's solidarity here, but also tension, 100 small negotiations every day just to carve out a moment of quiet. Children bicker in corners, women share stories as they mend clothes. Men shuffle in from long days of work, heads low and voices tired. At night, when the world outside grows quieter, you can hear the house settling, the timbers creaking under the weight of so many lives layered one on top of the other. And all the while, hygiene is an idea, not a practice. In rooms where water is scarce and soap more precious than gold, staying clean is a battle lost before it begins. You might have a single wash basin for the whole floor, cold water dribbled out in small cups and fiercely guarded. Towels are reused until they're little more than damp rags, and every drop of water is stretched as far as it will go. The concept of a private bath is laughable. Most people have never seen one outside of a wealthy employer's house. The very air you breathe feels dense, laced with the sweat of labor, the smoke of a dozen cooking fires, and the persistent underlying odor of a world built on coal, effort, and the press of too many people in too little space. Some days, when the wind is right, you catch a breath of the Thames or the tang of horse manure from the street below, and for a moment the smell shifts, just enough to remind you that you're alive, that this is home, that everyone around you is enduring the same. You might look for a corner to call your own, a windowsill or a bit of empty floor, but even these are shared by necessity. The need for rest, for warmth, for safety outweighs any desire for solitude. In this world, to be alone is to be vulnerable, and so you learn to live with others, to share air, stories, and even your silences. Evenings bring their own rituals. Someone lights a candle or stirs the coals in the stove, and for a little while, the glow pushes back the shadows. You share food, tell stories, patch up the day's wounds. Privacy is traded for a measure of comfort, a reminder that you are not alone in your struggle. The city outside might be vast and indifferent, but in these crowded rooms, every life is interwoven with another's. Yet this closeness leaves its mark. You carry the scents and sounds of home with you wherever you go. The city becomes an extension of your own crowded world. Public spaces just as tight, just as noisy, and just as inescapable as the rooms you left behind. In this London, The line between inside and outside blurs, and everywhere you turn, the collective pulse of millions is felt in every breath, every glance, every moment spent searching for a scrap of space to call your own. This is the world in which notions of hygiene are born, not out of choice, but out of necessity, improvisation, and the relentless demands of survival. Before you can even think about what it means to be clean, you must first learn what it means simply to be, in a place where space, air, and even a moment's peace are treasures few can claim for long. In the thick, bustling heart of Victorian London, the meaning of clean is not what you might expect. You could be forgiven for imagining a city obsessed with dirt, where soot clings to every window pane and the reek of the streets lingers on every collar. Yet step into a crowded home, listen to the conversations that float between the thin walls, and you'll quickly discover that most Londoners genuinely believed themselves to be clean, sometimes even more so than their continental neighbors or the generations that came before. Cleanliness, after all, is as much an idea as a reality, and in these narrow rooms, ideas are shaped by necessity, tradition, and no small measure of superstition. Here, clean is measured not by daily rituals or sparkling surfaces, but by adherence to unwritten codes, old family wisdom, and a healthy skepticism of too much water. In a world where every bucket must be hauled from a public pump or well, the act of washing is neither routine nor casual. Water, especially in the city, is eyed with suspicion. Not simply because it's cold or scarce, but because the doctors and grandmothers alike whisper that bathing too often can sap the body's strength, thin the blood, and invite all manner of illness. Many sincerely believe that too much bathing weakens the body's natural defenses, leaving you exposed to chills, fevers, and worse. Mothers warn their children, a full bath is an indulgence for the reckless or the weak of mind, and if you want to keep your constitution robust, best to keep it rare. So, the Victorian morning begins not with a hot shower or a long soak, but with a careful, strategic approach to cleanliness. Most people perform what they call a sponge bath, if they have the means. In the cramped privacy of a bedroom or beside the family hearth, a small bowl of water is set out, always cold, unless there's time and fuel to heat it. A well-worn cloth or sponge is dipped and wrung out, then used to quickly swipe at the face, hands, underarms, and those most personal places. This, everyone agrees, is quite sufficient. The rest of the body, swaddled beneath layers of clothing, can wait until bath day, which comes maybe once a week for the fortunate, or even less for the many who cannot spare the time or the soap. The rituals of washing, such as they are, carry the weight of both tradition and practicality. The wealthy might instruct servants to fill ornate copper tubs with hot water carried up countless stairs, but even among the upper class, daily bathing is rare. Bathing is an event, something to be prepared for, discussed, and sometimes dreaded. Books are published offering rules for safe bathing. Never wash your face while traveling unless the water can be purified. Avoid sudden changes in temperature, and beware the dangers of a too thorough scrub. For the poor and the working class, such rituals are stripped to their barest essentials. A shared basin stands in the corner, water refreshed as often as means allow, and a sliver of soap is prized for its ability to stretch across many washes. Towels, if they exist at all, are coarse and endlessly reused. The very idea of soap is infused with both hope and anxiety, as it offers a barrier against the world's grime, but for many, costs too much to use freely. These habits are rooted in a peculiar blend of folklore and the science of the day. Bad air, the infamous miasma, remains the villain in countless tales of illness, and many believe that strong smells, not invisible germs, carry sickness from house to house. If you can mask the odors with flowers, vinegar, or a sharp splash of cologne, you are defended against the worst the city has to offer. Windows are flung open or sealed tight, depending on the current wisdom, and superstitions are passed down with the same certainty as family recipes. The chill of a damp shirt or the shock of cold water is regarded as more dangerous than any lingering dirt. Yet even in this world of caution and calculation, there are moments of longing for something more, a memory of childhood streams or a fantasy of plunging into cool, clean water on a hot day. Children, especially, chafe at the strictures, sneaking extra handfuls of water when they can, delighting in the rare pleasure of rain on bare skin. The city, for all its rules, cannot completely erase the universal desire to feel refreshed, even if the definition of refreshment is constantly negotiated. In this way, the Victorian definition of cleanliness is as much about self-control as it is about soap and water. To be clean is to be proper, to avoid extremes, to find a balance that keeps you upright in the eyes of your neighbors. It is a matter of reputation as well as reality, shaped by fears both ancient and modern, and by the daily struggle to stretch every resource a little further. And so, every morning, in tenement rooms and grand houses alike, Londoners set about their modest ablutions, convinced that their routines are not only sufficient but necessary. For them, to overindulge in washing is to court disaster. To neglect it entirely is to risk shame and suspicion. Somewhere between these two poles lies the careful, complicated truth of Victorian hygiene, a truth as layered and elusive as the city itself. Bathing in Victorian London was never just a matter of stepping into a warm shower and letting the stress of the day dissolve down the drain. Instead, it was an event, an ordeal even, a ritual, carried out with a seriousness that bordered on superstition and with a reluctance born of harsh practicality. For most people, a bath wasn't a daily or even weekly experience. The idea of immersing the entire body in water, especially hot water, struck many as somewhere between eccentricity and outright madness.
The heart of ordinary Victorian washing was the humble sponge bath. In every cramped bedroom, next to battered washstands or at the family hearth, you would find a battered jug and a shallow basin, the tools of everyday cleanliness. There was no question of filling a tub. Running water was a luxury far out of reach for the majority. Hot water, meanwhile, was a rare treat, something achieved only after carrying heavy buckets from the kitchen stove. Even among those who could manage it, the sheer effort made frequent indulgence unthinkable. Each morning, the routine was almost ceremonial. A small portion of cold water was poured into the basin, and a square of cloth or a well-worn sponge was dipped in and wrung out. The ritual began with the most visible parts, the face, the hands, the neck, moving on to underarms and, as Victorians so delicately put it, the necessary places. This careful, targeted washing was considered not only sufficient, but prudent. Everything else, hidden by layers of clothes, could wait until bath day, a rare and significant occasion. Bath day was something families planned for, joked about, and, in some cases, quietly dreaded. It wasn't uncommon for an entire household, parents, children, grandparents, sometimes boarders, all to share the same bath water, one after the other, eldest to youngest. Water was precious. Heating it took time, energy, and a significant amount of fuel. The first bather got the best of it. The last had to make do with what remained. By the time the youngest child slipped into the tub, the water resembled a murky soup of soap, grime and the city's unending dust. Still, for those at the end of the line, it was a moment of rare comfort. If you lived on the edge, where every penny mattered, even this ritual was a luxury. For some, a proper bath happened once a month, if that. The rest of the time, the trusted basin and sponge had to do. It was simply impossible to do more when water had to be carried up multiple flights, soap was a costly commodity, and heating enough water to fill a tub meant burning precious coal. Among the better off, bathing was only a little less daunting. The wealthy might own large copper or tin bathtubs, and some even built special bathrooms to accommodate them, complete with elaborate fixtures and painted screens for privacy. Yet even in these privileged households, daily baths were nearly unheard of. Servants would toil to carry up steaming buckets, filling the tub for the master or mistress, then labor to empty it all again when finished. Even so, custom held strong, twice a week perhaps, if you were unusually enthusiastic about cleanliness.
Advice literature from the period reinforced these habits. Medical authorities published pamphlets warning against the dangers of too much bathing. Overindulgence in hot baths, they argued, weakened the nerves, thinned the blood, left the constitution vulnerable to chills and the mysterious miasmas thought to cause illness. Travelers were cautioned to avoid washing their faces unless the water could be properly purified with spirits or ammonia. Books recommended elaborate regimens, first washing with hot water, then finishing with a splash of cold to invigorate the skin and prevent sagging. It all sounded exhausting even on paper. In this world, bathing was not a simple act of refreshment. It was a balance between the need to stay clean and the dangers of overdoing it. Too much water, too much effort, too much exposure, any of these could tip the scales toward misfortune. The focus was always on moderation, on using only what was strictly necessary. For those who could afford it, there were powders and pomades to mask any lapse in freshness. And for everyone else, the city's ever-present haze of smoke and coal provided a sort of universal camouflage. Despite the obstacles, there was a stubborn pride in the way Victorians kept themselves. The weekly or monthly bath was a milestone, a small victory over the grime of the city and the grind of daily life. It was a moment when families came together, made do with what they had, and for a brief time claimed a sense of dignity and renewal. That simple basin of cold water, the battered sponge, and the ritual of careful, methodical washing, these were acts of resilience, tiny declarations that, even in a world of scarcity, a person could still find a way to feel new again, if only for a little while. No matter where you stood on the social ladder in Victorian London, you were engaged in a constant battle against grime, one that was shaped as much by your bank account as by the city's endless supply of soot and dust. The city itself seemed to breathe filth, pushing coal dust through every window crack and coating everything with a stubborn gray film. But while everyone struggled with the same air, the ways people fought back against the dirt could be worlds apart, exposing the vast gulf between the lives of the privileged and those scraping by in the shadows. If you belonged to the city's working class, the laborers, the seamstresses, the porters and maids, your approach to cleanliness was defined by limits. Water didn't flow easily into your home. It had to be carried in buckets from a communal pump or purchased by the jug from a street vendor. Every drop was precious, measured and rationed. Soap was an indulgence, stretched to the last sliver or replaced by homemade substitutes. Ashes, sand, sometimes nothing but elbow grease and determination. When it came time to wash, the process was almost always public, a matter of necessity rather than comfort. Whole families, and sometimes lodgers, would crowd around a single basin, taking turns with the same water, each hoping to get in before it grew too cloudy with use. Bathing, that rare ritual, was an even more communal affair. In homes that owned a tub, its use was strictly rationed. On bath day, a line formed. First the father, then the mother, then children in order of age, sometimes followed by boarders or extended family, if space and water allowed. By the end, the last in line, often the youngest child, slipped into a tub of water that had long since ceased to resemble anything clean. For many, this was still preferable to the alternative. No bath at all, just a quick wash of face and hands and a silent prayer that the layers of clothing would mask what water could not. The ritual of bathing, though simple, carried its own sense of dignity. There was a pride in facing the city each week with at least a little of its grime washed away. Women, in particular, clung to traditions of personal care even in the most meager circumstances. Carefully braiding hair, dabbing a bit of rosewater or vinegar behind the ears, finding small ways to assert control over an untidy world. For some, ingenuity filled the gaps. A kettle of hot water, scavenged soap, or a handful of wild herbs could turn a humble wash into something almost luxurious. But step into the world of the wealthy, and the picture changes dramatically. Here, the problem was rarely one of access, but one of custom and belief. Stately homes had dedicated washrooms, and copper tubs gleamed under painted ceilings. Servants, sometimes entire teams, were tasked with hauling buckets of hot water up from the kitchen, filling the bath for their employer's use. Yet even in these privileged spaces, daily bathing remained rare. The same fears of weakened nerves and sickly air, the same anxieties about over-cleansing, shaped habits from the grandest townhouse to the humblest rooming house. 2 baths a week was the height of luxury, and even then, water was often shared among members of the household. The first bather might luxuriate in clean, steaming water. The next made do with what was left, and so on, until even the grandest bath became a symbol of shared fate. Advice literature, medical pamphlets, and household manuals circulated throughout the city, all offering their own brand of wisdom. Some warned against washing your face on a journey unless you could purify the water. Others recommended alternating between scalding and freezing water to invigorate the blood. Every class was united by the strange, shifting borderlands of folk wisdom and early science, always teetering between caution and the desire for comfort. Physicians cautioned against the dangers of drafts and sudden chills, warning that a shiver after a bath could spell weeks in bed. Parents monitored their children's bathing habits with the same vigilance as their table manners, fearful that too much water could do more harm than good. These rules, though sometimes bewildering, spoke to deeper anxieties. In a city where disease could sweep through crowded neighborhoods in an instant, every choice was weighed and considered. Every ritual carried the echoes of past catastrophes. Water, though essential, was never fully trusted. Too much could weaken you. Too little could mark you as unkempt or careless. And always, underlying everything, was the relentless democratic pressure of dirt, the city's great equalizer, reminding rich and poor alike that for all their differences, they were still bound by the same shared struggle. Yet in the end, it was the poor who bore the brunt of the city's grime, the ones whose hands and faces showed the story of every day lived close to the edge. They made do, they improvised, and they found community in shared hardship. The wealthy may have bathed in marble tubs, but the water still cooled. The soap still ran thin, and the challenge of keeping clean, truly clean, was never fully overcome. Not for anyone. In Victorian London, dirt belonged to everyone, but the ways people faced it revealed as much about the city as the dirt itself. Teeth were one of the great unspoken sources of misery in Victorian London, a secret agony that reached across class, age, and gender. In the city's crowded streets, a genuine smile was as rare as a new pair of boots. Beneath polite greetings and cautious laughter, people hid aching molars and broken teeth. each one a reminder of how little stood between discomfort and outright suffering. For the majority, dental care was less about hygiene and more about survival, and the lengths people went to protect what teeth they had were as inventive as they were, at times, desperate. Toothbrushes existed, but not in the way we imagine today. They were a luxury item, the kind of thing you'd find in the washstand of a banker or a well-off merchant. With stiff bristles made from animal hair and handles carved from bone or wood, even the best brushes were harsh on sensitive gums and out of reach for most budgets. The cost of a single brush could equal a week's food for a working family, so the poor made do with whatever came to hand. Some chewed the ends of twigs until they frayed into natural bristles. Others rubbed their teeth with linen rags, a bit of salt, or a dab of soot pinched from the hearth. Those who could stretch to a little chalk would scrub it along their molars, while the bravest might venture to try powdered cuttlefish bone, an experience as gritty as it sounds. The home remedies didn't stop at cleaning. If you suffered a toothache, and many did, thanks to a diet full of coarse bread and the city's relentless grime, relief was hard to find. Some swore by cloves pressed into a decaying cavity, hoping the spice would numb the pain. Others chewed on celery sticks or nursed small glasses of spirits, numbing the ache, if only for a little while. It was not uncommon to see people clutching their jaws in the street, eyes bright with pain, murmuring quiet prayers that the agony would pass on its own. But inevitably, there came a day when no trick, no home remedy could hold off the inevitable. The only solution was extraction, a word that carried a special kind of dread. For most Victorians, there was no such thing as a dentist in the modern sense. Instead, you went to the barber, the blacksmith, or the traveling tooth drawer who set up shop in the market square. These practitioners had more skill with scissors or horseshoes than molars, and the tools of the trade were often terrifying: pliers, knives, or whatever metal instrument was handy. There was no anesthesia, no comfort, just a quick grip, a sharp wrench, and the hope that you'd remain conscious. Many endured the ordeal in silence. Others screamed and wept, attracting crowds who watched with morbid fascination. It was a kind of public theater, a few seconds of agony, a crimson-streaked handkerchief, and the promise of relief, if you were lucky. It was not just adults who suffered. Children lost their milk teeth in the same haphazard ways, sometimes encouraged to tie a string to the offending tooth and the other end to a doorknob. A good slam might do the trick, or just add to the misery. Wealthier families tried to spare their children the worst, but even they relied on the crude methods of the day, placing their trust in the steady hand of a family servant, or, at best, a traveling dentist who carried a little chloroform in his battered bag. Animals played a surprising role, too. Horsehair was sometimes woven into makeshift toothbrushes, while bones and teeth from animals found their way into the mouths of the wealthy in the form of dentures. There were stories, told with a mix of horror and laughter, about dentures made from the teeth of the recently departed, purchased from unscrupulous grave robbers or battlefield scavengers. Those with the means might visit a specialist for a set of false teeth, but even these were uncomfortable, ill-fitting, and prone to falling out at the most inopportune moments. If there was any silver lining to this world of dental hardship, it was the resilience and humor that grew in response. People swapped grim jokes about London smiles, gaps where teeth had once been. Old songs made light of toothaches and the makeshift cures people tried. Friends commiserated over shared misery, trading advice on which street vendors sold the softest bread, or who in the neighborhood had the gentlest touch with a pair of pliers. In the end, dental care in Victorian London was an ongoing negotiation with pain, poverty, and the limits of invention. Clean teeth were rare, complete sets even rarer. The wealthy might preserve their smiles a little longer, but no one was truly spared. Through all the discomfort, people found ways to manage, to joke, and when all else failed, to accept that sometimes the only solution was a quick yank and a hope for better days ahead. In the shadowed mirrors of Victorian London, hair was more than an accessory. It was a kind of public declaration, a symbol of health, beauty, and social standing. But behind those intricate updos and carefully parted styles, the truth about Victorian hair care was a strange blend of improvisation, kitchen alchemy, and a high tolerance for discomfort, especially when it came to smells. For most people, washing one's hair was a rare event, something reserved for special occasions or moments when necessity truly demanded it. Once a month was the gold standard, and even among the wealthy, washing hair more often was considered eccentric, even risky. The very act of dousing your scalp with water, especially in a city where both cleanliness and warmth were hard-won, was approached with trepidation. Too much moisture, the thinking went, might leave you vulnerable to chills, headaches, or worse.
Yet hair, especially for women, was expected to be nothing short of glorious. It was the crowning glory of every well-dressed lady, styled in complicated braids and piled high with ribbons, combs, and pins. Even girls from humble backgrounds aspired to emulate the fashion, their hair gathered and twisted as neatly as possible. The result was that, once set, a hairstyle would often remain largely untouched for days or weeks, with only minimal adjustments each morning. So how did Victorians actually clean their hair? The answer lay in a sort of creative desperation. Without access to modern shampoos, people scoured their pantries and local markets for anything that might refresh their locks. Eggs, for instance, were a popular choice among the bold and the fashionable. The process was simple but far from pleasant. Crack a few eggs, whisk them, and massage the mixture into the scalp, hoping the proteins would strip away the city's grime. Afterward, a rinse with water, usually cold, for hot was a rare luxury, left hair with a faint aroma of breakfast that might linger for days. Vinegar and water formed another go-to solution, the sharp scent considered a small price to pay for the promise of shine. Some favored black tea, believing its tannins would strengthen their strands. The adventurous might splash rum or rosemary-infused water, each concoction touted in magazines or passed down as a family secret. The results were unpredictable, sometimes glorious, sometimes disastrous, but always accompanied by a whiff of whatever had been left in the kitchen that week. For those with money and a taste for luxury, the options multiplied. Perfumers and apothecaries offered hair pomades, thick, scented pastes made from animal fats and aromatic oils. These promised health and luster, but in practice they created a film that quickly went rancid, especially when hair was rarely washed. The result? Elaborate styles that looked splendid from a distance, but up close exuded a pungent mixture of old grease and perfume, earning fashionable women a reputation for smelling expensive, but not always pleasant. Men were not immune to the era's creative grooming. Pomades and oils were worked into sideburns and mustaches, sometimes with disastrous consequences for collars and pillowcases. Barbers sold their own mysterious blends, boasting secret ingredients that could banish dandruff or encourage hair to grow thicker. None of these products offered what modern users would consider a clean, fresh feeling. Instead, they built up over time, matting the hair and locking in the city's dust.
Despite all this, Victorians were proud of their hair, going to great lengths to keep it looking presentable. Hairbrushes were used daily, sometimes up to 100 strokes a night, under the belief that this would distribute natural oils and create a healthy shine. Women slept with their hair wrapped in cloth or carefully plaited to prevent tangles. Decorative bonnets and hats offered not only fashion, but also a practical barrier against the city's filth. But the relentless quest for beauty had its price. The buildup of oils, powders, and scented pastes could turn even the most elegant coif into a breeding ground for discomfort. It was not uncommon for hair to develop an unmistakable tang, a heady mix of sweat, oil, and whatever household remedy had last been applied. Lice and scalp irritations were persistent problems, often treated with yet more kitchen concoctions, vinegar rinses, kerosene rubs, or even a sprinkle of flour to absorb excess grease. Still, there was something undeniably resilient, even admirable, about the Victorian approach to hair. People did what they could with what they had, transforming simple ingredients into beauty products and turning necessity into ritual. The world around them may have been dirty, chaotic, and unpredictable, but with enough ingenuity and a dash of stubbornness, they managed to hold their heads high, their hair piled and perfumed, ready to face another day in the teeming city. Doing laundry in Victorian London was nothing short of a trial, an endless, back-breaking routine that left hands raw, tempers short, and the faintest hope of true cleanliness forever out of reach. It's easy to imagine that the city's inhabitants were simply careless about their clothes, but the reality was far more complicated, shaped by poverty, scarcity, and a daily battle against a world designed to get people dirty. For most, washing was not just a chore. It was an ordeal that stretched across hours, sometimes days, and tested the limits of endurance and ingenuity. Soap, the very thing meant to stand between a person and the stains of city life, was expensive. A proper bar of manufactured soap might be reserved for the most visible parts of a household, table linens, the master's shirt collars, or a daughter's Sunday dress. The rest of the time, families relied on makeshift alternatives. Homemade soap, boiled from animal fat and caustic lye, was a common option, but its harshness left skin cracked and fabric thin. To save what they could, many families turned to even stranger solutions. Oil stains were tackled with chalk, blood and grass removed with kerosene. And for the most stubborn odors, there was an almost secret weapon: human urine. Containing ammonia, it was surprisingly effective at bleaching and deodorizing, but the process required strong nerves and stronger stomachs. Clothes would be soaked, scrubbed, and left to dry, sometimes reeking of their own cure. The logistics of laundry day were daunting. First came the water, carried in heavy buckets from a pump, well, or public tap, sometimes up countless stairs. The water had to be heated, an exhausting, time-consuming task that used up valuable coal or wood. Then, each item was scrubbed by hand against a washboard, wrung out and rinsed, never enough times to truly banish the grime of city life, but as much as aching arms could manage. Laundry was a social affair, too. Women gathered in courtyards, along riverbanks, or at public washhouses, sharing news and complaints as they worked. It was one of the rare moments when burdens could be aired along with the linens, but the laughter was always tinged with fatigue. Because washing clothes was so demanding, no one did it lightly. Outer garments, coats, dresses, trousers, were worn for days or weeks between washes, sometimes longer. Every piece of clothing was precious, patched and repatched, and often passed from one family member to another. Even undergarments, the layers worn closest to the skin, were not changed as often as modern sensibilities might expect. The wealthy could afford more frequent changes and softer linen, but for the majority, a single set of underclothes had to last as long as possible, carefully spot-cleaned or aired out at night. This scarcity led to a culture of disguise and adaptation. Fashion itself adapted to the city's realities. Dark fabrics were favored for their ability to hide stains, and elaborate patterns or layers provided camouflage against accidental spills or persistent smudges. The elegance of a sweeping skirt or finely tailored jacket often concealed the fact that, underneath, everything carried the invisible scent of city life. Perfumes and colognes were pressed into service, dabbed onto necklines and cuffs in the hope of masking whatever the latest wash day hadn't conquered. For many, the memory of fresh laundry was just that, a memory, sweet and fleeting. Despite all the obstacles, people clung to the rituals of cleanliness, taking pride in what little they could accomplish. A crisp white collar, a newly ironed apron, or a pair of stockings dried in the sun became tokens of self-respect in a world determined to wear everyone down. Laundry day itself was something of a paradox, a source of exhaustion, frustration, and, just occasionally, triumph. At the end of it, as lines of shirts and sheets fluttered in the city's uncertain breeze, there was always the hope that tomorrow, if only for a while, someone might breathe in deeply and catch the faintest hint of soap, sunshine, and the stubborn will to stay clean against all odds. But the battle was never truly won. Even as the last shirts came in from the line, the city's invisible scent, a complex, shifting aroma born of effort, smoke, sweat, and sacrifice, clung to every garment, a badge of both survival and silent rebellion. In this way, Victorian fashion was more than what met the eye. It was a daily negotiation with the city itself, and a testament to the endurance of those determined to wear their best no matter what the world threw at them. Victorian clothing was as much about survival as it was about style, each layer serving as a barrier between the individual and a world overflowing with grime and unpredictable encounters. It's tempting to see the fashion of the era, endless skirts, tightly tailored coats, starched collars, and heavy boots, as expressions of taste. But look closer, and you'll find a set of practical adaptations, each designed to manage the persistent realities of a dirty city and a life where washing was scarce. Underwear, for those who had it, was the unsung hero of Victorian dress. For wealthier Londoners, crisp linen or cotton undergarments provided a crucial shield between skin and the outer world, soaking up sweat, oil, and the slow accumulation of city dust. For the working poor, underwear was often a privilege, not a guarantee. Many made do without, layering clothes to stretch the life of each garment and washing only the smallest, most easily replaced pieces when water allowed. The daily donning of underclothes became an act of quiet defiance, a personal barrier against discomfort, and a practical strategy for stretching the time between laundry days. Women, in particular, became artists in the subtle engineering of dress. A respectable lady wore not just a dress, but a carefully composed ensemble, camise, corset, multiple petticoats, and finally the outer skirt and bodice. All those layers weren't just for modesty or shape. They were insulation against the elements, and, just as importantly, against the city's filth. Billowing skirts swirled around boots and ankles, sweeping up the detritus of the streets, mud, ash, the ever-present reminders of horse-drawn traffic, while sparing the wearer's skin from direct contact. The hem became a kind of sacrificial line, battered by cobblestones and damp, but easily replaced or hidden beneath another layer. Even men, whose wardrobes seemed plainer by comparison, relied on a subtle hierarchy of layers. Shirts, waistcoats, and cravats absorbed sweat and odor long before it reached the thick woolen coats that signaled respectability on the street. Dark fabrics dominated, for good reason. Coal dust and soot were invisible on black and navy. Stains blended into browns and grays, and the slow fade of wear and tear was less obvious on a suit that was never meant to look pristine. A well-tailored jacket could be worn for weeks without a full wash, carefully brushed down each night to dislodge the worst of the day's debris. Yet, for all their function, these garments also became vessels for a distinct aroma, the secret scent of the Victorian age. It was a blend as complex as any perfume. Sweat trapped by unwashed wool, the sharpness of old starch, the faint tang of coal smoke, the lingering hint of perfume or pomade. Clothes became personal ecosystems, evolving scents over days and weeks that told silent stories about the city, the season, and the wearer's fortunes. The wealthiest masked these odors with colognes and scented handkerchiefs, while others relied on flowers pinned to lapels or tucked into bonnets to freshen the air just a little. But no one, rich or poor, was immune to the struggle. A sudden downpour could soak layers and bring out every buried scent, while the relentless press of the crowds, on buses, in markets, in church pews, blended individual aromas into a symphony of the city itself. Social rules demanded everyone strive to appear as clean as possible, yet everyone knew how much effort and subterfuge went into maintaining the illusion. Still, clothing offered more than just physical protection. It was a form of social armor, a way to move through the world with dignity even when true cleanliness was out of reach. Layers could be peeled away at home, giving the skin a brief chance to breathe. Petticoats and shirts could be mended and patched, maintaining appearances while hiding the wear of daily life. For many Victorians, fashion was less about following trends and more about navigating the constant push and pull between public scrutiny and private comfort. So the next time you picture a Victorian crowd, those rivers of hats and bonnets, the dark-clad men and bright-flounced women, remember that every garment is part camouflage, part fortress, and part confession. Beneath the starch and the lace lies the secret of an era, a people who learned to wrap themselves in cloth and courage, carrying the city's smells and stories wherever they went. Stepping out onto a Victorian London street was like entering another ecosystem, one that revealed the raw mechanics of a city struggling beneath its own relentless growth. The further you walked from the battered comfort of your home, the more the true texture of urban life made itself known, not in the grand facades or the clipped topiary of the wealthy, but in the debris, the smells, and the quiet, ceaseless labor of those who kept the city just barely habitable. There was no orderly trash collection, no regular hum of garbage trucks at dawn. Instead, refuse piled up wherever it was most convenient or least offensive to leave it. The simplest solution was out the window. From upper stories, families would toss everything from potato peelings to broken crockery straight into the alley below, a gesture so common that cries of warning became part of the city's soundtrack. "Gardy-loo," some shouted, a relic of an older time, hoping to spare the unwary below a surprise shower of kitchen scraps, ashes, or worse. As weeks passed, trash accumulated in the gutters. Animal bones gnawed clean, paper wrappings, shattered bottles, old shoes, and every other leftover of daily life. Rain turned the mix into a soupy mess. Summer baked it into a crust, and wind sent lighter bits spinning down the street. Children played among the debris, their games punctuated by the splash of passing carriages to puddles tainted with more than just water. But the most obvious and omnipresent reality was the city's reliance on animals, especially horses. Thousands clopped through the streets every day, pulling carts, omnibuses, and delivery wagons. Each horse left behind daily evidence of its passing, quickly ground into the cobblestones by wheels and feet. A fresh pile might be swept up by a savvy gardener for his roses, but most was left to accumulate until the city's signature aroma became inescapable. Add to this the occasional carcass, too large for ordinary disposal, dragged to the curb and left to await a nighttime removal crew, and it's easy to understand why the streets were rarely, if ever, truly clean. Then there were the night soil men, unsung heroes of the city's sanitation, or what passed for it. By day, they were invisible, but at night, these workers shouldered their tools and set out to empty privies, hauling away human waste from households without proper plumbing. Their carts creaked through the silent streets, leaving behind only the faintest promise of relief and a trail of rumors about what really happened to all those barrels. Some waste ended up on farms as fertilizer. but much found its way to the Thames, the city's great artery and dumping ground. The river itself became the last desperate resort for all that could not be otherwise disposed of. On its banks, mudlarks searched for salvage among the muck, while others dumped everything from animal remains to industrial runoff straight into the current. As the tides turned, the river breathed the city's secrets back to shore, slicks of waste, the stench of decay, and sometimes stranger things that washed up in the night. For those living near its banks, the river horrors were just another fact of life, their senses dulled by years of enduring what most visitors could not tolerate for even an hour. The city's poorest found their place in this economy of waste. Rag pickers, bone collectors, and scavengers working from dawn till dark to pull value from what others threw away. Children, nimble and unafraid, squeezed between carts and under bridges in search of coal, scraps of cloth, or metal they could sell for a penny or two. At the margins, nothing was truly useless. Everything found its way back into circulation, patching up lives as best it could. Despite these efforts, Victorian London's streets never really escaped their signature scent, a pungent mixture of animal, human, and industrial life. Visitors remarked on it with shock, while locals took it in stride, their senses gradually dulled by routine and necessity. The challenge of urban living was not just to survive, but to adapt, to learn to read the patterns of filth and flow, to know when to leap over a gutter or step aside for a dustman with his creaking cart. And in the end, the streets told the true story of the city, a place where beauty and squalor marched side by side, where every sunrise revealed the ongoing struggle between order and chaos, and where the dream of cleanliness was forever pursued, yet always just out of reach. If you truly wanted to know the heart of Victorian London, you didn't need to look at its grand architecture or bustling markets. All you had to do was ask, where does everything go when it's time to clean up after yourself? The answer for most was as close as the underside of the bed. In thousands of households, rich and poor alike, the answer to nature's call meant reaching for the chamber pot, that humble, ever-present bowl tucked discreetly out of sight. Whether porcelain for the well-off or battered tin for the struggling, these pots were a fact of daily life, emptied when convenient and often to places best not closely examined. For some, the next stop was the shared privy, a small, drafty shed at the far end of the yard with a creaking wooden seat set above a pit that slowly filled over days, weeks, or longer. In crowded tenements, several families might share a single privy, and keeping it even moderately clean was a never-ending challenge. Rats, insects, and a swirling haze of flies made every trip unpleasant, and in winter, the cold bit as sharply as the smell. Wealthier homes might have more elaborate arrangements, an indoor closet with a primitive flushing mechanism, usually operated by pouring water from a jug. Even then, the waste had to go somewhere, and the answers grew more complicated and less effective the higher up the social scale you went. What truly united the city, however, was the question of disposal. Chamber cots were emptied into cesspits, onto dung heaps in the yard, or, more commonly, straight into the gutter. The city's open sewers, little more than sluggish streams running alongside the roads, carried away the worst of it, at least in theory. In reality, the flow was slow, blockages common, and much of the city's waste simply pooled wherever the system failed, creating pockets of stench that would linger for weeks. All of this was tolerated, if not exactly accepted, until the infamous summer of 1858, a season so notorious it would forever be remembered as the time of the Great Stench. That year, a combination of drought and soaring heat reduced the Thames to a slow-moving soup of waste, its surface thick with everything the city had to offer. The smell was so overwhelming that Parliament itself was nearly shut down, with politicians fleeing meetings and curtains soaked in chloride of lime in a desperate attempt to keep the stench at bay. Newspapers painted vivid pictures of misery, and for once, all classes found themselves united in disgust.
The great stench was not just an inconvenience. It was a tipping point. For years, Londoners had lived with the threat of bad air, believing that foul smells bred illness and disaster. With cholera outbreaks sweeping through the city again and again, fear grew that the city's filth might be more than just an embarrassment. It was a danger to life itself. Parents kept children inside on the worst days. Doctors warned of mysterious vapors, and for a brief, frantic season, the entire city was held hostage by its own neglect. This crisis forced London to confront a simple but overwhelming truth. What went out must eventually go somewhere. The city's haphazard patchwork of cesspits, privies, and makeshift drains was no longer enough. The fear of disease, the weight of public shame, and the raw, unforgettable assault on the senses combined to demand real change. What had once been an unspoken background detail, waste, its movement and disposal, became a problem no one could ignore. Thus, out of the great stench, the movement toward real sanitation was born. It would take years and enormous effort to solve, but for the first time, the dream of a cleaner, safer London was no longer just for the hopeful or the rich. It was a necessity declared by every corner of the city, by the humblest chamber pot and the grandest hall alike, that the business of waste, invisible until now, had become the business of everyone. Out of crisis, Victorian London found its unlikely hero, a man armed not with sword or scepter, but with blueprints and an iron determination to turn back the tide of filth. Sir Joseph Bazalgette, a civil engineer with a vision and the patience to see it through, stepped into history at the precise moment the city could no longer bear its own neglect. The great stench of 1858 had shocked the government into action. For the first time, everyone agreed that the city's rivers of waste, once merely an inconvenience, were now a threat to life and civilization itself. Bazalgette's answer was as bold as it was ambitious. Build a network of underground tunnels, vast enough to carry away the waste of millions, and finally put an end to the horrors that had haunted London's streets and homes. But this was no simple task. The city sprawled in every direction, its buildings piled atop one another with little thought for what ran below. Centuries of ad hoc solutions, drains, cesspits, gutters, made for a labyrinth beneath the ground. Bazalgette's team had to tunnel under houses, rivers, and entire neighborhoods, carving out miles of brick-lined sewers large enough to walk through. Construction itself became a spectacle. Thousands of laborers, armed with picks and shovels, dug day and night, moving earth and brick by hand. Steam engines and cranes groaned over open trenches. Whole neighborhoods shook with the sound of progress. And all the while, Bazalgette refined his designs, calculating the needs not just of his own time, but of the distant future. A network built not for today's city, but for the millions yet to come. The financial cost was staggering, provoking outrage and resistance from property owners, business leaders, and politicians alike. Taxes rose, tempers flared. Letters to newspapers railed against the wastefulness of such a grand scheme. But as cholera continued to strike and the stench of the Thames refused to fade, resistance weakened. The city had seen enough suffering, enough tragedy. Slowly, public opinion shifted from skepticism to hope, as people began to believe that real, lasting change was possible. Of course, not everyone benefited at once. The wealthiest districts, as always, received attention first. Grand new pumping stations, palaces of brick and iron, rose along the riverbanks, their elegant facades hiding the gritty, vital work within.
But in the poorer neighborhoods, change came more slowly. Old habits and makeshift solutions lingered for years, as workers struggled to connect every tenement and alley to the new network. It was a race against time, disease, and the ever-growing city itself. Bazalgette sewers transformed the city in ways no one could have predicted. Streets grew cleaner. The Thames lost its infamous reek. Disease rates dropped, and with them a sense of shame and fear that had haunted Londoners for generations. Children could play outside, and families no longer dreaded the arrival of summer. The city, for the first time, began to breathe again. And yet, the legacy of the sewer revolution was not just technical, it was psychological. Londoners learned to expect, even demand, a level of public health and comfort that had once seemed unimaginable. Cleanliness, once the concern of the wealthy, became the right of everyone. Bazalgette himself became a quiet legend, his name woven into the very fabric of the city, not just for what he built, but for what he made possible. A new kind of London, cleaner, safer, and more hopeful than anyone could have dreamed at the height of the Great Stench. But even as the last bricks were laid and the city began to change, the memory of what came before lingered, reminding everyone that progress was not a gift, but a battle hard won in the depths beneath their feet. For generations, the people of Victorian London moved through a fog of fear, never quite sure where illness began or how it might strike next. The city's relentless cycles of fever and suffering were blamed on the most immediate, undeniable culprit, the smell. To Victorian minds, bad air, miasma, was the harbinger of disease. If the city stank, as it often did, then danger was close at hand. Doctors, mothers, and city planners all agreed. To breathe the thick, fetid air of the slums or the riverside was to court disaster. And there was reason for this belief. When cholera and typhoid swept through the crowded neighborhoods, they seemed to follow the smell, rising where the stench was strongest, sparing, or so it appeared, the cleaner and sweeter parts of town. The city's epidemics were stories told in scent. The panic of a sudden heat wave, the dread of summer storms that stirred up the streets and turned the Thames into a bubbling cauldron. Officials distributed lime and vinegar, desperate to mask the odors, convinced they were fighting the very root of the problem. But beneath the surface, a quiet revolution in thinking was underway. Amid the swirl of superstition and old wisdom, a handful of skeptics began to question the city's invisible enemy. One such man was Dr. John Snow, a physician whose calm persistence and scientific rigor would change the world. When cholera struck yet again, Snow set out not just to treat its victims, but to find its source. Where others saw foul air, he saw patterns, families falling ill, clusters of cases spreading along certain lines. He began to suspect that the cause was not what people breathed, but what they drank. His most famous investigation unfolded in 1854, in the heart of Soho, where an outbreak of cholera decimated the population. Snow pored over maps, tracked every case, and discovered a startling connection. Nearly every victim had drawn water from a particular public pump on Broad Street. Ignoring ridicule from his colleagues, he persuaded local officials to remove the pump's handle. Almost immediately, the outbreak subsided. For the first time, evidence, not rumor, had pointed to a culprit. Water, not air, carried the deadly disease. Yet old ideas died hard. Even after Snow's work, many clung to the comfort of familiar explanations. Miasma had the power of tradition and habit, a story told and retold in every household. The city was slow to embrace the invisible world of microbes and waterborne infection. Still, cracks began to form in the old thinking. Snow's triumph and the work of others like him offered hope that science could not only explain, but conquer the plagues that had haunted London for centuries.
These early victories came not just from laboratories or lecture halls, but from the lived experience of ordinary people. As the city's new sewers carried waste away, the air did grow sweeter, and, more importantly, the epidemics receded. Bit by bit, the lessons of the past were rewritten. It became clear that progress depended on challenging tradition, testing assumptions, and believing in the possibility of change. The battle between miasmas and microbes was more than just a scientific debate. It was a turning point in how people understood themselves and their world. It demanded courage, the willingness to question what everyone knew and to trust in the evidence of one's own eyes. In that shift from scent to science, from fear to understanding, lay the foundation for the future. A future in which the city, at last, could hope not just to endure, but to heal. In the hidden corners of Victorian life, the subject of women's hygiene was cloaked in a mix of secrecy, superstition, and awkward silence. Conversations that might have led to practical solutions were stifled by embarrassment and a culture that valued modesty above almost anything else. For many women, learning how to care for their bodies meant relying on whispered advice, half-remembered warnings, and a trial-and-error approach shaped by the era's persistent taboos. Monthly cycles were treated as a kind of unmentionable trial, something everyone endured but almost never discussed openly. Girls learned what to expect from older sisters or mothers, often at the last possible moment, and even then, details were sparse. Medical science, itself still groping for understanding, had little useful to offer. Some doctors warned that exertion or bathing during this time could lead to illness or even nervous disorders. Others spread myths about moral or emotional dangers, encouraging women to hide away or limit their activities for days at a stretch. Faced with these fears, women invented their own methods of coping. In place of commercial products, which did not exist for most of the century, they turned to what was at hand: folded rags, bits of linen, or scraps of old flannel, carefully washed and reused. These homemade solutions were discreet, sometimes uncomfortable, and rarely adequate, but for most women there was no alternative. Washing and drying such cloths had to be done in secret, hidden away from the eyes of men and children. The embarrassment of discovery was powerful enough to keep many girls from seeking help even when they struggled. The first commercially produced sanitary products appeared slowly, mostly in the closing decades of the Victorian era. Early pads were bulky and often homemade, secured in place by belts or pins, and never mentioned in polite company. Advertisements, when they existed at all, spoke in code, offering ladies' necessities or hygienic belts with the vaguest promises of comfort and discretion. For many, the cost was simply out of reach, and so old methods persisted alongside the new. Doctors, for their part, were divided. Some embraced the idea of better hygiene, encouraging women to bathe gently or use soft cloths. Others warned that excessive cleanliness might upset the body's balance or undermine a woman's natural constitution. The anxiety around women's bodies extended into every aspect of life, from the fear that bathing might invite illness to the suspicion that too much knowledge about one's own health could encourage improper curiosity. The social silence around these subjects only reinforced the sense of shame and isolation. Intimate matters were not to be spoken of, even in the closest families. Medical textbooks tiptoed around the facts, and advice columns offered only the blandest guidance. The reality for many women was one of improvisation and quiet endurance, managing discomfort as best they could, concealing both the evidence and the effort. Yet, beneath the surface, a slow change was gathering momentum.
Women's magazines began to discuss hygiene more openly, though still in guarded terms. Nurses and midwives passed on practical tips, and the gradual appearance of purpose-made products offered a glimmer of relief. These early efforts, though small and incomplete, marked the first steps toward recognizing women's needs as valid, even important. The path was slow and often lonely, but it laid the foundation for a future in which care, comfort, and knowledge would finally become accessible to all. For the women of Victorian London, hygiene was more than just a private ritual. It was a test of resilience, creativity, and courage, a daily negotiation with the rules of propriety and the limits of what could be said aloud. In every hidden bundle of cloth, every cautious question, lay the seeds of change, waiting for the moment when silence would give way to understanding and care.
In Victorian London, illness was both a familiar companion and an unpredictable menace, a force that swept through homes and streets with little warning or mercy. The line between healing and harm was never clear, and medicine, for all its growing authority, was often entangled with mystery, ritual, and guesswork. When sickness struck, families placed their faith in a blend of ancient practices, home remedies, and the latest scientific marvels, some of which did more harm than good. The first line of defense was usually the home medicine chest, a collection of bottles and powders whose contents were as varied as the city itself. Among the most common treatments was bloodletting, a tradition inherited from centuries past. The belief that draining a patient's blood could restore the body's balance was so deeply rooted that few questioned its wisdom, even as the weakened and pale often slipped further from recovery. Physicians, barbers, and sometimes even self-taught family members would wield leeches or scarificators, convinced that with each drop lost, sickness was being drawn out. Alongside bloodletting came a host of potent substances. Mercury was one of the era's favorite cures, prescribed for everything from skin ailments to nervous complaints. Available as pills, ointments, or liquid, mercury offered hope, but often delivered disaster. The effects could be swift and brutal: trembling hands, loosened teeth, and a persistent metallic taste, signs that the cure was attacking the body as fiercely as any illness. Still, desperate for relief, people continued to trust in its promise. No Victorian medicine chest was complete with opium. Sold openly at apothecaries and even grocery shops, opium found its way into every corner of life. Mixed into cough syrups for children, folded into soothing teas, and dispensed in patent medicines that promised sleep, relief from pain, or a gentle escape from the anxieties of city living. Laudanum, a tincture of opium, was a household name, passed from hand to hand in small brown bottles. The line between medicine and dependence was thin, and many, seeking comfort from sleepless nights or chronic pain, found themselves quietly ensnared by its embrace. With so many cures in circulation, the risks of accidental harm were ever present. Some found themselves weakened by repeated bloodletting. Others grew pale and ill from the slow, relentless assault of mercury. Overdoses, both accidental and deliberate, were common, their tragedies hidden behind closed doors. Even so, few alternatives existed, and for many, the greatest hope lay in enduring just long enough for the body to heal itself.
Surgery, the last resort, was a thing both dreaded and admired. Without effective anesthesia for much of the era, operations were swift, brutal affairs, measured not in minutes but in the surgeon's speed and steadiness. The threat of infection was constant, for antiseptics were still new and not universally trusted. Families waited outside operating rooms with prayers on their lips,
knowing that to survive the knife was only the first step in a long, uncertain recovery. Yet, for all its dangers and disappointments, Victorian medicine was not without progress. The slow shift from old beliefs to careful observation, the first glimmers of germ theory, and the emergence of hospital care marked the beginning of a transformation. The city's doctors and nurses learned from their failures as much as their triumphs, gradually replacing guesswork with knowledge and ritual with reason. In the end, seeking health in Victorian London was an act of both courage and hope. People faced illness with the tools they had, relying on a mix of tradition, invention, and the unwavering belief that relief was possible. Every remedy, however misguided, was a testament to the relentless desire to heal, even when the line between cure and calamity was as thin as the edge of a scalpel. Food in Victorian London was both a necessity and a gamble, with every meal shaped by scarcity, improvisation, and the ever-present threat of hidden danger. The city's appetite was enormous, fed by sprawling markets and endless shipments of produce, but the gap between what was offered and what was truly safe to eat could be as wide as the Thames itself. Milk, which might seem the simplest of staples, was approached with caution. Without reliable refrigeration, milk soured quickly, especially in the warmth of crowded homes or summer streets. To make matters worse, it was common practice for sellers to stretch their supply with water, sometimes clean, but often drawn from wells contaminated by the city's drains. Chalk or flour might be added to thicken it, and sugar to mask the telltale tang of spoilage. Mothers boiled milk before letting their children drink it, hoping to stave off illness, but many still remembered tales of sudden, unexplained fevers after an innocent glass. Food in Victorian London was both a necessity and a gamble, with every meal shaped by scarcity, improvisation, and the ever-present threat of hidden danger. The city's appetite was enormous, fed by sprawling markets and endless shipments of produce, but the gap between what was offered and what was truly safe to eat could be as wide as the Thames itself. Milk, which might seem the simplest of staples, was approached with caution. Without reliable refrigeration, milk soured quickly, especially in the warmth of crowded homes or summer streets. To make matters worse, it was common practice for sellers to stretch their supply with water, sometimes clean, but often drawn from wells contaminated by the city's drains. Chalk or flour might be added to thicken it, and sugar to mask the telltale tang of spoilage. Mothers boiled milk before letting their children drink it, hoping to stave off illness, but many still remembered tales of sudden, unexplained fevers after an innocent glass. Storing food presented a daily challenge. Meat, cheese, and vegetables had to survive without ice or modern packaging. The wealthiest might have ice boxes, filled with blocks delivered from distant lakes, but most households depended on the rhythm of the markets, buying small amounts each day and preparing meals as quickly as possible. Yet even fresh goods came with risk. Meat hung in shop windows for days, darkening in the city air, sometimes dusted with sawdust to hide the worst signs of decay. Fish arrived from the coasts, but spent hours, sometimes days, on crowded carts in the heat, acquiring a shine that had nothing to do with freshness. Markets overflowed with second-chance bargains. Yesterday's bread and almost fresh fruits sold at a discount to those willing to take a chance. Stallholders hawked vegetables with bruised skins, or potatoes showing the first hints of rot. Spices, far from being a luxury for flavor, became an essential tool for survival. A heavy shake of pepper or nutmeg could hide the taste of meat that was past its prime, while vinegar or mustard masked suspicious odors. Even the ever-present tea, beloved for its warmth and comfort, was sometimes adulterated with old leaves or colored with copper to restore its lost color. For the working poor, the question was not just what to eat, but whether to eat at all. Every penny counted, and the ability to stretch a loaf of bread or make a thin broth from scraps could be the difference between a full stomach and an empty night. Resourcefulness became a way of life. Households learned to spot a bad egg by spinning it on the table, or to test a hunk of cheese by sniffing and scraping away mold. Food safety was a distant dream, and government oversight limited at best. Poisonings from tainted meat, spoiled milk, or chemical-laced sweets were common enough to be a grim fact of city life. Newspapers reported sudden outbreaks, and pamphlets warned against unscrupulous dealers, but the need to eat always outweighed caution. For many, the solution lay in the kitchen's alchemy, stewing, boiling, and seasoning until danger was masked, if not truly banished. Even the simple joy of a meal came wrapped in anxiety, a negotiation between hunger, thrift, and the risk of what lurked unseen. In this world, taste was as much about trust as pleasure, and the rituals of shopping, cooking, and eating were colored by a constant, low-level vigilance. Yet, through all the challenges, the city's people endured, finding ways to turn risk into routine and routine into the comforts of home. Every loaf of bread, every cup of tea, every careful sniff of milk was a small act of survival, a testament to ingenuity and hope in a place where the next mouthful was never entirely guaranteed to bring comfort. In this, as in so much else, Victorian Londoners lived always on the threshold, inventing a daily cuisine from whatever the city could provide, and trusting, at least a little, in their own hard-earned wisdom to see them through. Work in Victorian London was an all-consuming force, shaping not only the city's skyline, but the very bodies and habits of those who kept its engines running. From the sprawling textile mills and dark coal mines to crowded workshops and busy markets, labor was relentless, and so was the dirt that came with it. Hygiene, in the world of Victorian workers, was a privilege rarely granted by circumstance, more a fleeting hope than a routine expectation. Each morning, men, women, and even children poured from tenements and lodging houses into a city already alive with the rumble of carts and the clatter of machinery. For many, the day began in a haze of coal smoke and damp fog, the air thick with the promise of another long shift. Factory gates swallowed them by the hundreds, each worker quickly disappearing into a world where the light was dim, the air heavy, and the tasks repetitive. Inside the factories, dust and lint swirled in every beam of sunlight. Workers at spinning machines or looms breathed in fine fibers with every breath, their hands blackened by oil and dye. The lucky ones might wipe their faces with the edge of an apron, but there was rarely time or water to clean up properly before the next bell sounded. In the mines, conditions were harsher still. Men and boys labored in darkness, hacking at seams of coal with bare hands and rudimentary tools, lungs filling with black dust. Each hour underground meant another layer of grime pressed into skin and hair, another scar added to hands and faces already worn from years of effort. Breaks for food were brief and practical. Lunch, for most, meant sitting on a crate or stoop, hunched over a crust of bread or a bit of cold meat. Hands stained by work reached into tin pails, dirt smudging every bite. Clean cutlery was a luxury. Sometimes, so was soap. The rhythms of the workday left little energy for scrubbing, and most simply wiped their fingers on trousers or skirts already patterned with the marks of weeks gone by. For the lucky few with steady employment in cleaner trades, clerks, shopkeepers, or skilled artisans, the struggle was less obvious but still real. Shops were swept each morning, and clerks were expected to present a neat appearance. But even here, the city's dust worked its way in, settling on ledgers and shelves, sneaking under collars. After hours spent tallying or tending customers,
Shoes and cuffs still bore the imprint of the streets. Evenings brought no instant relief. The journey home was another passage through crowds and filth, a slow migration back to rooms that offered shelter but little escape from the day's residue. Water for washing was doled out with care, first for faces, then hands, and only if anything remained for the rest. Soap, expensive and rationed, was saved for special occasions or the rare luxury of a full bath. The daily grind left its mark not just on bodies, but on spirits. Persistent coughs and respiratory ailments became the soundtrack of working-class neighborhoods, while chronic aches, cuts, and sores told stories of unending toil. Children grew up knowing the taste of dust before they could spell their own names, and parents measured health not by absence of illness, but by the ability to keep working another week. Yet, through all of this, resilience thrived. Workers developed their own rituals of care. Mothers bandaged scraped knees. Neighbors shared tips for easing a cough or cleaning stubborn stains. And even the simplest moments of rest, tea in a chipped mug, laughter at a shared story, became small acts of defiance against the city's grind. Hygiene for Victorian laborers was not a standard to be met, but a goal to be chased. It was found in a stolen minute with a wash basin, in the pride of a clean collar on payday, in the communal effort to stay upright against the forces of exhaustion and dirt. Every meal eaten with dirty hands was an act of survival, and every attempt at cleanliness, no matter how fleeting, was a quiet reminder of the dignity that endured even in the city's harshest corners. As the 19th century pushed onward, a shift began to ripple through Victorian London, a transformation not only of its streets and homes, but of the very way its people thought about themselves and their bodies. The era that had once accepted grime as an inevitable part of city life now found itself in the throes of a new fascination, the promise of cleanliness, health, and the marvels of modern science. This change was not just a matter of new inventions, but of a culture reimagining what it meant to be proper and, for the first time, clean. At the heart of this revolution was the humble bar of soap. For generations, true soap was costly and hard to come by, reserved for the privileged or used sparingly by those with less. But industrial advances made mass production possible, and suddenly soap could be found on the shelves of grocers and market stalls across the city. Manufacturers, eager to reach a growing market, invested in the novel art of advertising. Bright posters and clever slogans sprang up in shop windows and on street corners, extolling the virtues of purity, freshness, and gentle care. Names like Piers and Sunlight became as familiar as the city's landmarks, and housewives, tempted by visions of sparkling collars and sweet-scented hands, bought into the promise. Advertising did more than sell products. It helped shape a new ideal. Soap was no longer just for removing dirt. It became a symbol of morality, success, and upward mobility. To be clean was to be respectable, to care about your family and your future. Even the poorest aspired to these standards, saving pennies for a new bar or sharing tips on how to make supplies stretch a little further. The culture of cleanliness became an aspiration that crossed class boundaries, forging a sense of unity in the pursuit of a better life. This new way of thinking found its way into schools as well. Hygiene lessons became a regular part of the curriculum, with teachers drilling students in the importance of hand washing, bathing, and dental care. Illustrated pamphlets and children's books presented cleanliness as not only wise, but patriotic, an act of civic duty as much as self-care. Posters in public spaces reminded citizens to wash their hands before meals and to keep their homes tidy,
encouraging a sense of pride in even the smallest acts of personal upkeep. Scientific discoveries lent power to these messages. The rise of germ theory, the revolutionary understanding that invisible organisms caused many of the diseases that had haunted the city for centuries, provided a rational basis for the rituals of cleanliness. No longer was it enough to simply mask odors or scrub away visible grime. Now, even the most ordinary habits took on the urgency of prevention and protection. The simple act of washing hands became a defense against unseen enemies, a daily battle in the name of health and progress. Social reformers seized on this new knowledge, campaigning for public baths, cleaner streets, and improved housing. Charities and local councils sponsored lectures and demonstrations, spreading the gospel of soap and water through crowded neighborhoods. Cleanliness was celebrated in newspapers, novels, and sermons, a sign of personal virtue and a beacon of hope for communities eager to leave the old struggles behind. Change came slowly, and not everyone embraced it at once. Old habits lingered, and poverty still placed limits on what many could achieve. But the direction was clear. The city that had once grown accustomed to filth and disease was now learning to see cleanliness as a kind of freedom, a chance to rise, to hope, and to claim a measure of dignity in a changing world. The revolution was as much in the mind as in the body. Victorian Londoners began to imagine themselves as part of a new future, one where soap, knowledge, and shared aspiration could remake not just homes, but the very spirit of the city itself. The story of cleanliness had become the story of progress, and in every shop window and schoolhouse its promise glittered just within reach. Gradually, as Victorian Londoners embraced the idea of cleanliness, dirt began to take on a new, loaded meaning, a social code that ran deeper than simple hygiene. Cleanliness was no longer just about comfort or health. It became a visible badge of character, a sign that you belonged to the ranks of the respectable and the aspiring. Meanwhile, dirt, once a universal reality, simply endured, was transformed into a mark of failure, a reason for suspicion, and sometimes outright condemnation. This shift was as much psychological as practical. As the city's middle classes adopted new standards of personal care, the gap between clean and unclean became not just a matter of water and soap, but of status. To be clean was to show you had the means, discipline, and moral fiber to rise above your circumstances. Campaigns for public hygiene, led by reformers, city officials, and advertisers alike, hammered home the message: dirt was the enemy, and those who allowed it to flourish were somehow lacking not just in money, but in virtue. Posters appeared in schools and workplaces showing tidy families in bright clothes standing proudly outside well-scrubbed homes, while shadowy figures in rags lingered at the margins, surrounded by the tools and refuse of poverty. Magazines ran stories about the transformative power of soap and water, promising that anyone could rise in the world by adopting clean habits and a neat appearance. Even charities offering aid to the poor were often careful to tie their support to lessons in cleanliness, believing but a scrubbed face and laundered shirt could serve as a gateway to self-respect, and perhaps, one day, to prosperity. This new morality of cleanliness quickly became a tool of division. The city's poorest, already struggling to survive, now found themselves branded as dirty in both body and spirit. Reports on urban slums focused as much on grime as on hunger, and reformers, however well-intentioned, often equated filth with laziness, vice, or lack of ambition. The message was clear: if you could not manage to keep yourself or your children clean, you were seen as failing in your duties, not just to your family, but to society as a whole. Some tried to rise above these judgments. Mothers worked tirelessly to keep children tidy, patching and washing what little they had. Young men scrubbed boots and collars before looking for work, hoping to be seen as worthy of a chance. Public baths and washhouses, though a source of hope for many, were also places of scrutiny, where every stain or ragged cuff became a silent test of character. Even the act of seeking help was tinged with shame, as people internalized the idea that to be clean was to be good, and to be dirty was somehow to deserve your lot. Yet, in the midst of all this, the campaigns for hygiene did bring real, lasting change. They spread knowledge, encouraged pride, and gave many the tools to strive for better lives. Children learned about germs in school and carried the lessons home. New mothers shared tips on washing and health. Even in the city's poorest corners, the desire for dignity found its expression in a bar of soap or a bucket of fresh water. Cleanliness became a kind of quiet rebellion, a way to claim agency and hope, even when the world seemed set against you. Still, the era's fixation on dirt as a social marker cast a long shadow. It fostered judgment where there might have been understanding, division where there could have been solidarity. But it also sparked a movement that helped lay the foundations for a healthier, more equitable city. Over time, the lessons of Victorian London's hygiene crusade became not just about looking good, but about caring for one another, and about recognizing, at last, that the pursuit of cleanliness was not just a personal journey, but a collective one. The transformation that swept through Victorian London was not just one of pipes, soap, and posters. It was a revolution in how people saw themselves and each other. The pursuit of cleanliness, once a simple matter of necessity or luck, became a shared vision of hope, progress, and dignity. As the decades passed, the effects rippled outward. Homes grew brighter, streets less oppressive, and the air itself seemed lighter, as if the city were breathing easier for the first time in centuries. This new habit of cleanliness changed far more than surfaces. It gave rise to a quiet but profound shift in how people felt about their lives and their possibilities. The daily acts of bathing, washing clothes, scrubbing floors, and tending to personal hygiene became small rituals of self-respect and self-assertion, tiny declarations that the future could be different from the past. Each clean collar, every freshly swept step was a testament to perseverance and hope, a subtle but unmistakable promise to oneself and to the world. Women, who so often shouldered the unseen burdens of keeping families healthy and homes orderly, found their voices and their power in this transformation. As advocates for sanitation, health education, and public reform, they helped to drive changes that reached far beyond their own households. Mothers taught children not just how to scrub, but why it mattered. Nurses and social workers carried the message into the darkest corners of the city, demanding safer water, better housing, and a new respect for the everyday labor of care. The fight for cleanliness and the fight for equality grew together, each strengthening the other, and with every victory, the city itself seemed to glow a little brighter. Science, too, played its part, shedding light on the invisible world of germs and contagion, transforming old superstitions into knowledge and practical action. With each new discovery, the city's people grew more confident in their ability to shape their own fate. Public health became a cause worth rallying around, a source of civic pride as well as individual comfort. Cleanliness came to symbolize more than absence of dirt. It was a vision of happiness, opportunity, and shared prosperity, something to be celebrated and protected for generations to come. For those who had grown up in the shadow of filth and fear, the change was more than material. It was deeply emotional. The city that once felt hostile and unforgiving became, gradually, a place of hope. Clean streets and fresh water promised a healthier future, but also a more just and compassionate society. Children could play without dread, Parents could nurture dreams that went beyond daily survival. The memory of struggle lingered, but it now served as a reminder of how far they had come and how much could be accomplished when people worked together for a common good. So, as the 19th century faded into the 20th, Londoners found themselves transformed, inside and out. The city's story, once marked by hardship and resignation, now turned toward promise and possibility. The new habit of cleanliness was more than just a change in routine. It was a new way of seeing the world and of believing in a future shaped by care, determination, and the quiet, unbreakable spirit of hope. In every clean window and every joyful gathering, the city's heart beat a little stronger, forever changed by the simple, stubborn dream that life could and should be better for all.